Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be making these summer doodles. I'm going to start out by drawing the elements, but I'll also have the outline available in case you don't want to draw them out and get straight to painting. Prior to making this, I already had a rough idea of the things that I wanted to include for this page of doodles. I want more of a beachy vibe, so I want to include summer outfits, ice cream, sandcastles, shells, and things like that. But you can take a completely different approach if you would like to mix and match the elements that I'm going to include in this one with other objects that you might have in mind, or completely change all the items and have a similar composition. This is based on the page of winter doodles that I did last year. I really like the idea of having a summer outfit in the middle, just like my winter doodle, and have all the other objects surrounding it that has to do with summer. This is why I drew out the top and the shorts first so I can frame the other objects around it. You can also include a different outfit if you have other things in mind. For me, these were the outfits that came to mind first, and I'm just going with the flow as I draw the other objects, which is why you'll actually see me erasing and redrawing objects or switching the objects a few times in this video. I'm not giving it too much thought because I just want this to be a fun and relaxing doodle session. As an example, I will actually redraw this section right here again because I didn't like how the shapes end up looking for the sandcastles, and I also simplified it, but I just want to leave it for now and draw the other things so I can have a better understanding of how to spread out the objects surrounding the outfit in the middle. I don't feel like I have much to say about this drawing portion, but I'll just leave it on in case you want to see how I break down the objects to draw each element. And I'll get back to you once we're ready to move on to the next step. Once I'm done with the pencil sketch and moving the objects around, and I'm happy with how they're positioned, I'm going to outline the pencil sketches using my ink pen. I'm using my Sakura Micron pen in Sepia, but you can also use black. It doesn't matter, I just prefer a dark brown color for this because the color will soften the outline slightly. While creating the pen outline, I will also be making some changes as well as add textures along the way. As an example, I will turn these shorts into jeans, so I will add on textures and change the shape slightly. However, if you feel uncomfortable doing it straight with pen, you can also do this in the sketching portion with pencil first, so you do get to erase the mistakes and it will be much easier once you're ready to outline it. I think this is fairly straightforward. I'm just going to outline all the objects here. If I want certain lines to not be as defined, like the lines for the sections of the paper umbrella, I will create dashed lines instead. And I will also make textures with dashed lines or with dots along the way. If, say, I want to add sand textures for the sand castles and things like that. But I think is pretty self-explanatory by watching me outline this, and I will just leave this on because a lot of you seem to find it relaxing to watch. So I'll get back to you once I'm ready to move on to the next step, which will be painting and coloring in all these elements. For parts of the outline, if you feel like you need to make corrections but you don't know how to do it straight with pen, you can also erase it and draw it out with pencil first before outlining it, just like what I'm going to do with this rainbow right here, because I feel like I really need it to be right at the center of all the other objects surrounding it. So feel free to do that when you need to. And you can also add on other elements along the way if you want. Once I'm done, I'm just going to erase all the pencil marks first before I get to painting. So here are the colors that I've selected for this painting. You can also use colored pencils or any other medium if you would like. Firstly, this is Quin Sienna by Daniel Smith, Yellow Ochre by Holbein, Buff Titanium by Daniel Smith, Permanent Yellow Deep by Holbein, Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, Cerrulean Blue by Holbein, Naphthol Red by MG, Graphite Grey by Daniel Smith, Sap Green by Holbein, and Terre Verte by Holbein. I'll also be using this blue Stabilo sensor pen for added details later on. I'm going to begin by using buff titanium to paint the shadow of this top, and I'm going to leave that to dry before I paint on the details. So I'm moving on to paint the center of the flowers using Permanent Yellow Deep. For this whole painting, I'll either be using a thick consistency or a medium consistency, so the colors will be nice and vibrant. For the color of the sun, I'm going to use Hansa Yellow Medium, and after this I'm going to paint on the details of the top. I'm going to use Cerrulean Blue for this because I want that summery beachy vibe, and I just find that this color is very summery, but you can also use other colors or create other patterns if you have anything else in mind. Moving on to the straw hat now, I'm just going to use Yellow Ochre by itself, and I'm using a medium consistency and also adding water to certain areas because I want to create an uneven surface, and I'm doing this so parts of the hat is lighter and some parts are a bit darker. I try to work in batches when I can, so while I still have yellow ochre on my brush, I color in other areas that I find would look good with this color. And as for the ice cream cone, after this, I'm going to follow it up with a bit of Quin Sienna for the shadows underneath the scoop of ice cream. The next color that I'm going to mix up is yellow ochre with buff titanium, so the yellow ochre is a bit lighter, and I'm going to use this to paint the sandcastles as well as other sand things. And as for the sandcastle, I want to completely dry this off because I want to add shadows using just yellow ochre by itself for one side of it to separate the two sandcastles. And as for the flags, I use Naphthol Red and Cerrulean Blue, so it's nice and bright. For the kite, I use a thin consistency of Naphthol Red with a bit of buff titanium, and I dotted some Naphthol Red by itself also, but it turned out a bit too dark for my liking, so I ended up taking the excess off with tissue. I'm going to go back to the sandcastles now because they're completely dry. For the windows, I used a dark brown mixture from Graphite Grey and Quin Sienna, and then I just took off the excess using tissue. For this pile of sand right here, I used the exact same color mixture from buff titanium and yellow ochre. I used Graphite Grey by itself for the sunglasses, and I tried to paint diagonally so I can create some sort of reflection. I'm going to use the light consistency of Graphite Grey for the bow on the hat, but you can also use brighter colors as well if you would like. For the paper umbrella, I'm going to use a mix of Naphthol Red and buff titanium, just like the kite. So I think from here you can start to see how I spread out my colors and the simple color mixtures that I use for this painting. For the shell, I use buff titanium as the base color, then I use a really thin consistency of Cerrulean Blue for one shell, and I use a very thin consistency of Naphthol Red for the other. I personally try to limit the color mixtures as well as the main colors that I use for this painting, so it's mostly Cerrulean Blue and Naphthol Red, or the pink that I use from a mixture of Naphthol Red and buff titanium. I will introduce greens later on for the leaves, but I try to work in bulk so I don't accidentally create more colors than necessary. For the shorts, I use a mixture of Cerrulean Blue with a little bit of Graphite Grey to mute the color slightly. as for the top part and also the seams underneath, I use more graphite gray in the mix to darken the blue. I also decided to turn this into jeans as I mentioned earlier for the outline, so after it has dried, I added more details for the pockets and also stitch marks. For all of the leaves, I'm just going to use Terre Verte straight up, and I'm just going to do one layer of this color in a medium consistency. For the popsicle, I'm going to use a thin consistency of Hansa Yellow as the base color. Then I'm going to follow this up using a slightly thicker consistency of Permanent Yellow Deep to paint the top section as well as the little dips so it doesn't look too flat. For the shovel, rake, and bucket, I'm going to use bright colors to paint them. I used Cerrulean blue as well as sap green for the shovel and the rake, and as for the bucket, I'm going to use Naphthol red by itself. I want to use bright colors for this because I want them to look like toys, but you can also pick out other hues if you would like to. To separate the inner part of the bucket, I added graphite gray to the Naphthol red so it looks a bit darker, and I also use a slightly thicker consistency of Naphthol red to paint underneath the handle as well as the rim on the side. For the starfish, I used a mixture of cerulean blue with Naphthol red to create more of a purplish tone, and then I added graphite gray to this color to paint the sides so the shape looks a bit more three-dimensional. Before I paint the watermelon, I actually dampened the surface first, then I use a thick consistency of Naphthol red and drag it downwards before I reach the bottom. Then I added a bit of sap green and then I let that dry so I can layer on a darker green from a mix of sap green and graphite gray. For the ice cream at the top, I used buff titanium with a little bit of Naphthol red, and as for the bottom, I used the same color mixture as the starfish. I also dotted a thicker consistency of the same color for the bottom as well as the side of the ice creams, just to give them a bit more form. For the top of the rainbow, I used Naphthol red in a thin consistency, followed with Permanent Yellow Deep, then a mixture of cerulean blue with a little bit of sap green. I'm going to add on little details and certain decorative elements to make the composition look a bit more full, dynamic, and fun. So I add things like more leaves if certain areas look a bit too empty. I'd like to also add seeds to the watermelon, dots to the starfish as textures, and also specks of sand to fill in the composition. I'd like to also add textures to the hat and things like that, anything you can think of to make the doodle look a bit more convincing. As the finishing decorative touch, I also decided to add wiggly dashed lines to represent a summer breeze. I first tried using a brush to draw this on, but I didn't like how the lines end up looking. I really want this to look nice and clear, which is why I ended up using this blue pen. If you don't have access to a blue pen, you can also use colored pencils if you would like. So after this, I'm just going to do final adjustments, adding all the elements that I mentioned earlier if I need to fill in some space. For the leaves that I added towards the end for the flowers, I will wait for this to dry so I can outline it using the same ink pen just to make it consistent with the rest of the composition. So that's it for the beach doodle. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like usual, all the list of tools, colors, as well as my social media links will be in my description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!